and gentlemen. I'm Amelia Hadfield. Welcome to the Institute for European Studies. It's a delight to welcome you all here. This is the IES Autumn Lecture Series for 2012, and it's sportingly entitled EU Energy Policy on the Road to Decarbonisation, which is an extraordinarily tough and also very interesting theme. This is the fourth lecture that we're going to be embarking on this evening. If you have a look at the program, which you should all have by now, you can see that what we've been doing is effectively setting the stage, setting the groundwork, first by looking at the EU's energy acquis and then the climate policy acquis, and then last week looking at the various roadmaps and scenarios to try to define effectively what we mean by decarbonisation 2050. And this week now, effectively, we're focusing even more on particular sectors, on decarbonising the power sector, and looking at the opportunities and the challenges therein. And I'm delighted to welcome our two guests this evening from the European Climate Foundation on my left, Arne Morbren, who's going to be your first speaker this evening. Arne is the Programme Director for Power from the European Climate Foundation. And to his left, Suzanne Nies, who is the Head of Power Generation Policy Unit at Eurelectric, and so she'll be speaking second. I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that the lecture series is sponsored under the support of the Jean Monnet Fund, the Lifelong Learning Fund, and also in cooperation with the WWF and Climate Strategies and Ecologic. And also just a quick sort of housekeeping point that next week there is no lecture, so you have to roll on 2 weeks hence in order to reconvene, and I'm sure we all will. I'm looking at you sort of sternly. Decarbonising transport and industry, where we have 3 guests that evening, so it's a heavier night. I'm really excited to hear some of the Q&A that I know is going to follow. I know it's been a fairly punchy and interactive few sessions so far. I think it's interesting that we're going to get a chance to hear vivid ideas of what are possible and the challenges that lie ahead, particularly the policy responses, I think, that are potentially on offer. So each of the speakers has roughly 20 minutes each, and then after that we're going to jump straight into the bear hit, so to speak. So Arne, over to you. Thank you very much indeed.
What I will do is to give an overview of 2 studies that we have been pursuing at ECF together with companies and NGOs. But I started to think over it. I was a little bit provoked by opportunities and challenges. If you think this over, I think you can interpret that in a very, very different ways. So you can say, can it happen? Will it happen? Should it happen? I think is also an interesting question. When can it happen, and how can it happen? I will try to relate to this and come back to that in the very end. Some years ago, before I started at ECF, I had a discussion with some Chinese colleagues discussing decarbonisation, and they had a very simplistic view. They said, in principle, it's about economics and finance, it's about technologies or solutions, and it's about policies. And I think that is a very good way to try to structure this. If you make that sort of triangle, in the middle you will have markets. And markets will drive this development. But it's not just about markets, it's about how markets are regulated, what sort of frameworks are created, what sort of investments will be done in creating new knowledge, what sort of financial resources will be available. So I just wanted to set that as a mindset. In 2009 and 2010, ECF worked with something called the Roadmap 2050, a practical guide to a prosperous low-carbon Europe. And what we did then was to look into, is it possible to decarbonize the European energy system? Is it possible to decarbonize the economy? What sort of role will power play in that? And I will just give a very short overview of the results of this quite extensive study. All the material is available on our homepage. I will give the address in here. And you see what it will take is, we started then with a 80% overall carbon reduction in the economy. What will that take in the time perspective, 2050? And you see that you need to do quite a lot. If you look here, where we were in 1990, where we were in 2010, where we need to be 2050, you see that there are sectors like power, transport and buildings that needs to be, in principle, completely decarbonized. At the same time, you can say, look, when you look into power in this time perspective, you see that a lot of possibilities will open up, because you will have to invest a lot in power, whatever. That is up to society and to different marketplaces to make the choices and fill the gap that builds up. And that is also, I won't go through that today. The Commission, I think the Commission will be here later on and present, or they have already been here and presented their roadmap. But you see that they have compared the costs, and we have done that also for different solutions. And you see whatever you will have to fill this with new investments. So it will be quite costly, whatever alternative you go for. So the conclusions or the highlights from this study was that, first of all, from a technical perspective, it's challenging but feasible to decarbonize the economy on the level of 80%. And that the power sector will play a very important role in that. If you look in Europe, at the average, the role of power will have to double in principle. And that was confirmed by DGN's roadmap as well, that power is up from 20 to 40% of the final consumption, I think it was defined as. So what we see is that you will need more power, or a second wave of electrification in society. We looked into different pathways. I won't go into that here, but you can see that there are clear choices to be made. You can do this in different ways. You can have different mixtures of nuclear, renewables, fossil fuels, but then with CCS to achieve the results. You also see that you will have to, I will come back to that, that you have to expand the transmission system, the capacity to interact between different parts of Europe, and that you will need much more backup capacity. The cost of electricity is in principle the same level for different alternatives. We work with 4 different scenarios. The Commission had 7, I think. And you see that the cost is a little bit higher in the decarbonized pathways, but what is really interesting is that the capital expenditure part is up enormously. There was another study published a year ago in Germany that looked into the capital and the cost mixture in power, and they said that today, if you look into power, you can say that around 50% of the cost is capital and expenditure, and around 50% is fuel costs to run the system. The decarbonized system will have a mixture around 90 to 10. So the capital or the capacity cost will be totally dominating. The transmission system will have to be expanded enormously, at least 3 times as big as today, from a capacity point of view. There will be quite it will be quite challenging to handle the variations in the system, but it's fully possible. We made another study that I will come back to in some minutes, looking to what extent that can be handled at time perspective 2030, and it's possible, but you need to invest in you need more cooperation and you need additional resources to do it. On the other hand, you can say that the macroeconomic impact is quite small, marginal. I would say that over time you won't see the difference there. So looking then into something disappeared here for me. It's quite weird. So what you see is well, what we try to calculate is the cost of electricity, and you see the bandwidth. The blue part is where you will be to fill the gap, whatever solution you choose. And the reddish part is where the decarbonisation alternatives are. So you see that it's in a way it's not a cost to society problem. But you can say that of course it will have it, or can have, depending on how things are handled, a tremendous effect on prices. The problem is, of course, to make the difference between cost to society and prices to consumers. Prices to consumers will be up. The way to handle that is to have more efficient solutions. So the total cost is kept in control. And the cost to society will be, in principle, fully possible to handle. Building on this study, we then looked into the situation 2050. In the first study, we use backcasting as a basic way to do it. And we built it around a power system model. So we balanced the power system in Europe and checked that you had power all the time, for every hour, the year around, in all points. Built on that, we also looked, we did some macroeconomic analysis and looked into the effects. But the core of the work we have been doing is building on the power system model. And that is fundamentally different from the work that the Commission has been supporting. That builds on an economic model. But the interesting thing is that with very two different approaches, you in principle get the same results. I haven't sorted out in my mind yet if it's so that it's fundamentally robust, or it mirrors the assumptions. It can be a combination. So what we wanted to do then was to take this, because it's quite easy in a way to discuss what will happen 40 years ahead. It's a quite open issue, and everyone will support decarbonisation 2050. It's quite an easy choice. The interesting thing is what will it mean for what we do in the coming 10 to 20 years. So we wanted to look into that and did a more detailed study last year with the same sort of constellation of companies, NGOs, ECF, we had consultants. We built it on power system modeling, looked into different scenarios. We had 16 scenarios. I won't go through any of them because I had 20 minutes and now I have 10. But I will tell you a little bit about the results. So where do you need to be if you want to decarbonize power in principle on the level 98 to 93% 2050? Where do you need to be around 2030? Yeah, you need to be on the level around 60, 54 to 68. That is built on the GDP material. But that is, in principle, you can look in where you need to be. And you see here is also where reality is. It's not performing very well. So here you see what sort of mix you would get in the base. if you look into this sort of development. You see that the renewables, the green part will grow enormously. That fossil fuels will be down. Gas will take a bigger and bigger part of the power supply. But of course this builds on assumptions. And just when we started the study, Fukushima happened, so we entered into an enormous debate on what to assume regarding nuclear power. So there are of course a lot of open issues. The main, most important assumptions here is on fuel prices and on carbon pricing. We have assumed that you have an ETS system that delivers a price that drives down emissions. So based on this, we could look into what would a power system look like in Europe. This is the situation 2010. What you see here is the power mix, and you see, in principle, it's not the grid. It's the capacity you need between centers of gravity. So it's a simplification. But what we have assumed in a model is that we have the power systems nationally and parts of countries are balanced in centers of gravity. And then we have looked into what would be needed to balance this. So it's the real grid is much more complicated, more fine-grained. And here you see what you need to do in the time perspective. 2020 already. You need to add quite some transmission capacity. But on the other hand, you can see that I think it's hard for you to read the slides. What is really interesting is that this is the OPEX cost and this is the CAPEX, what you need to invest. What you see here is what you need to do to build the grid and the backup capacity. You see that that is a tiny part of the total cost. But it makes an enormously big difference in different respects. If you don't expand the power system, you cannot use the resources to invest. So 90% of the investments around is in generation. So the system cost, so to say, is less than 10%, but it makes an enormously big difference. And if it's not delivered, what will happen is that you will have high levels of curtailment in some countries. And here you see the same for 2030. You need to do even more. So in principle, you had to add close to 40% of the capacity. And you have to add, based on that, close to 50% extra capacity. But it's still the same that the transmission and backup cost, the investment is tiny, but it makes an enormously big difference. So you see that it's an enormous challenge to do this from a grid perspective. We also looked into different alternatives. We looked into higher degrees of efficiency, demand response, and you see that it will really be helpful. I don't have time to go through that, but if you're interested, you can look into the study. We looked into different variations on the pace of investment and so on, what sort of impact it will have. So summing this up, then, this study in principle is said that first of all, that the grid, the infrastructure as such, upgrading that is really important. But the plans, existing plans, need to be implemented and much more need to be done. You can see that a diverse portfolio will be needed, that the interplay between renewables and thermal capacity is extremely important. That some sort of perspective on a European perspective of renewables beyond 2020 will be needed to drive investments. You also see that demand side measures like efficiency, demand response make a huge difference. The cost, this study confirmed that costs can be kept in control. There was a part where we looked into what will happen on the wholesale level, the price level in Europe, different parts and so on. And you can see that it's fully possible to cope from a wholesale market perspective with a lot of renewables if you have the transmission capacity. And the third or the fifth point was that you will need to invest a lot. This shift that I mentioned before was confirmed. CapEx, from OpEx to CapEx. So I have made a simplified version for you, so it's easy to remember. So it's in principle that the grid is the blue in decarbonisation. That the complementarity between renewables and thermal capacity, first of all, gas, in the time perspective, 2030 is really important. The problem is, of course, what will happen beyond 2030. And I would say that we don't know. We don't know what sort of role gas can play, and we don't know to what extent you will be able to store electricity. I'm quite convinced, even if we haven't started that with incentives in 20 years you can develop the storage capacity in the system, and that we can change part of the nature of the system. The fourth point was that a market solution and decarbonisation, those two agendas can be aligned. There is no inherent conflict. They aren't aligned, but they can. And that decarbonisation, to a very big extent, is about a major shift from OpEx cost to CapEx cost. The total cost, seen from society's perspective, won't be up, but you need to invest much more. So then coming back to my triangle, what have we been doing? We have been looking into the economic angle, and we have been looking into the technology angle. But the big challenge is politics and policy. So my answer to my own questions is that it's from a technical perspective, from an economic perspective, it's fully possible to decarbonize power. And it can play a major role in decarbonisation in Europe. If it will happen, it's up to society really. What sort of policies that will be applied to drive this sort of development, or it will be policy driven. And that also means that it needs to be high quality policies, because it will drive development over time. I also have a question, when will it happen? It will happen slowly over time. It won't happen tomorrow. You can see outbreaks of decarbonisation, as in Germany, for example. We had a tremendously strong development in Germany, starting from in principle nothing. Today they had I think 10 years ago they had 5% renewables. Today they had 1%. But you also see the problem with the system that you have to balance and cooperate with the neighbors. So you will see outbreaks, so to say, but the big change will happen quite slowly over time, because you have so much inertia in the system and you need to invest a lot. So first of all you need the capital, but even if you have the capital, the investments take time. So there are no quick fixes. Did I have any other question? Can it happen? Will it happen? Should it happen? Yes. When will it happen? Over time. And I would say that even if I look back, I've been working with back and forth with European policy for 20 years, more less. And if I compare the situation today to the situation 20 years ago, a lot of things have already happened. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I can agree very much with what was said before already from the ECF. But let me start maybe with something else. The question of today's conference or today's gathering is power mix in 2050, generation mix in 2050. Maybe the question is not completely the right one. In that sense that, is it really only about generation? There's sometimes this question if Tesla was reborn again, the person who has invented all these fantastic grids, and he would walk around today in Europe, he wouldn't be very surprised. He would find it quite similar to what he has created. But one can be quite sure that if he was born in 10 or 20 years' time, he would be quite disoriented. Because the system is going to change completely. A little bit like the telecom have changed completely. If you see an old film today, you don't find the same setting anymore again. And the system is not only about generation. It's not anymore about this kind of one-way path from supply to demand. It's going to be much more complex about storage, about smart grids, about non-transmission alternatives, about the role of transmission, etc. And I think it's really difficult today to completely anticipate how this system is going to be. And I'm quite sure we're going to be completely wrong if we try to do this. Just keep that in mind. When we're discussing 2050, it might be very different. 20 years ago, no one would have imagined to have a BlackBerry today. And if you would have asked Nokia in the 90s, how would the telephone look like, the cell phone, in 2012, they would have answered something. But certainly the answer would be completely wrong. So let's just keep that in mind. And therefore, this question on the generation mix, there's certainly some elements known already. It's certainly something like a lot of renewables, certainly something a lot of more IT, as was said already, certainly much more power than today, replacement of fossil fuels with something else. It's certainly also much more efficient houses. It's certainly much more energy efficiency, and even the demand increase, which I've seen on Arne's slides, and which we also have Eurelectric in our power choices study. We already see today there is a clear disconnect in the use of electricity and demand increase. It might not be as tough as we had believed it would be. So let me maybe go back to a bit, as French would say, terre à terre. What's today's situation in the power sector? And then let's discuss all the questions you have on your slides. What's the situation today? What are the opportunities and challenges in the sector? If you have a look on emissions in the past, and Arne was saying that also, can be also optimistic. If you see the challenges in the 90s, people were talking about, or 80s, about the forest dying from SOx and NOx and everything, you see a clear decrease. And SOx and NOx indeed also because of the policymakers and regulatory frameworks which have obliged the power sector to decarb to the SOx and the NOx, let's say. Yeah. CO2 emissions, many senses, the same. We've seen a certain increase again with the enlargements in 24, but we see a decrease also in the time after. So there's a clear tendency of decreased emissions. I took a quote with me from the European Environment Agency saying that European Union's total greenhouse gas emissions are down 2.5% in 2011. Indeed, the recession is also important. We know that after Fukushima, the fossil fuel use, especially, and was mentioned already, the low carbon price, and today we have a dark spread, means the coal use is more interesting in any sense than the use of gas, has increased in a way. Emissions, but due to the recession, due to the drop of demand, we see a drop all over the place in the CO2 in the European Union. Now let's have a look a little bit on the utilities. Arne was already mentioning the need for investments. Investments needed are quantified by IEA, International Energy Agency, by the Commission, to be something like 1 trillion by 2020, which is just an unbelievable amount for each of us. If it comes to private investments, can't even imagine this amount.
you're going to come out your electric in December with a study saying that forget it, yeah, it's not going to happen, forget it. 1 trillion is impossible. Because the lion's share of this should come from the private sector indeed, and if you see here the utility shares and compared to the shares of other of the European indices, it's really, really poor. We are in a huge turmoil today after due to the recession, due to other events, due to a chaotic regulatory framework. I come back to this a little bit later, and one could even make the joke we had the bailout, and now we're in a certain boil-out, let's say, for the power sector. Really dramatic. You see a slide on the demand trend. This is today's demand curve. That's our own data, power statistics from Euroelectric. You see the drop in electricity demand. It recovered last year. It goes down again. This is not good news indeed, also because investments are indeed going down again. Have a look on emission trading market. We see the clear oversupply, and this is certainly something we need to discuss. What exactly are the solutions for dealing with an ETS and a CO2 price which is absolutely not delivering today the right signals on investing in low carbon technologies? How can we empower this ETS and CO2 price in a way that it delivers on this? I think this is something we absolutely have to discuss, and you know, those of you who are following this very closely, you know these proposals by the European Commission. 14th of November there will be a proposal, backloading or tightening the cap or whatever it is. There's a lot of possibilities with all advantages and disadvantages. The European Bermuda Triangle, in a way, has been mentioned already. Sustainability, competitiveness, security of supply. The problem is today, from our point of view, that the policymakers are not getting that story right. In many senses, they are behaving a little bit, let's say, 19th century target obsession, Soviet Union style target obsession. Oettinger was recently talking about a storage target. There's all kinds of targets. This is not delivering the right policies. I've recently heard by Ernst & Young, the GDP part spent by governments in the EU is 40%, quite a lot, means on all kinds of things, but they should also innovate in policy making. And what we as the private sector would expect the policymakers to do is to get this triangle right in such a way that the priorities, and there should be climate change and decarbonization, ETS, should be a bit the priority over the others, which doesn't mean the others are not important. They're equally important. It's only the methodology which today doesn't get it right at all. So they should determine a consistent framework. That's the point. Governments are not the private sector. We have gone through quite successful so far, but also difficult liberalization in 3 packages on the power sector. Today, in many senses, we have the impression there's a kind of a re-regulation going on with a target obsession, and which is the risk of a huge amount of stranded investments of all kinds. Markets are important, and it's not the question if kind of Chicago boys 90s ideology of the invisible hand will get it right. The power sector must be regulated. It is about a good which is important to the entire society. Indeed, there needs to be a lot of policy making around the power sector, but the policy makers are not the utilities, they are not the private sector. They should get the framework right, and the market should get the rest right in the follow-up. So we believe that there's the need for aligning RES policies, the energy efficiency, and a CO2 policy in such a way that they are not cannibalizing each other, as is the case today. So the ETS should be clearly, according to us, the key driver. We also need to get this on a European level. A long-term framework is needed, and this has to be economy-wide. The power sector is certainly the most advanced in this sense. You've seen all the fight about getting the aviation sector in. There are other sectors to follow. We need to have decarbonization on an economy-wide scale in the end of the day. all available technologies, including renewables. Power sector is use them all in the given framework. If you see the history of power, you see that it was about coal, it was about oil, it was about nuclear, or it still is about nuclear, it's about gas, it's about everything, and it doesn't really matter. Indeed, as a utility, you have to care for the assets, as if someone who has a house just told now, get it down, put a more efficient, neutral building on the place, you wouldn't be able to do it from today to tomorrow. So there's a need to give you a certain time, because you are the person, you are the entity to deliver on the change. But all in all, the power sector is not linked to nuclear, is not linked to gas, is not linked to coal as one technology. We say use them all, use all the technologies, and this renewable is very promising. It's a set indeed of technologies. But we also believe that the renewables policies, as they have been done so far in Europe, they have been certainly a success. We have a lot of discussions with the Commission and with the policymakers, in that sense that everyone is surprised how many renewables are now in the system. But they have been also a failure in a way, because at least they might be a failure in that sense that the cost side is overrunning, that there is a lack of European development of renewables. We're going a bit down the North Korean track of the story now, and even in Germany, I'm German myself, Bavaria wants to be independent and many others. Yeah? It's a bit ridiculous. We are one Europe, and we need to develop renewables on a European scale. There needs to be bridges, there needs to be cost efficiency, there needs to be much more concern about it. And what's the good news about it? If you discuss with the renewables lobbies or with Euroelectric or the Commission, people get that story, especially in the light of today's recession. You can spend money only once, unfortunately. So cost-efficient development and least distortive support of renewables is certainly one of the main topics today. Rest to the markets, balancing, etc. Because you don't have a windmill because it's so beautiful, you have it because it generates electricity in the end of the day. Here is an initiative we have been teaming up with the European Wind Energy Association, some others, on the need for interconnection. If you have a look on the European TSOs Association, NSOE's forecast, you see there's a huge oversupply to come up in the Nordic markets. You see also that Germany is running into trouble. Isn't it stupid not to link up the Nordic markets with Germany? Isn't it stupid not to develop the offshore wind stuff on a European scale instead of developing it on a national scale? And all this needs to be fixed. And I think people like you, you're the new generation, we will be all old by 2050. You need to invent the governance for this. Because just take the example of the offshore wind. There's two possibilities. The offshore wind in the North Sea can be developed on a national pattern, and it can be developed on a European pattern. There's a big risk it's going to be developed on a national pattern simply because the national institutions are there. The European institutions are not there. There's complicated abbreviation NSCOGI, which is the North Sea Council of Governments, and etc. in some countries, yeah. But you don't have today the governance to really engage in this. It's more like Sunday meetings with some cake and some coffee. But people like you should empower this to get it for the sake of cost efficiency. And even also, Jean Monnet was always about these concrete steps. To translate this again afterwards in the general philosophy. I think this is really the big challenge for you. Innovation is extremely important. And if you compare Europe with other areas in the world, Japan or China, we are not spending 3% on innovation as we promised to do. But all this transition agenda is about innovation. We have many, many promising technologies out in the field. There might be a risk that we never see them applied, simply because Europe's innovation efforts are rather suboptimal. It's not only about spending money on 3%, it's also about the policies. If you compare Japan and Europe, the Europeans are always saying, we do everything. We do the tidal, we do the PV, we do absolutely everything, we're the best in all. In the end of the day, you see PV, we spent a line amount into photovoltaics, and the Chinese have been winning in a way. The same risk for many other areas. So there needs to be also a kind of preoccupation with the site Europe, the competitive place Europe, in investing into innovation. It needs to be also kind of humility, saying, we don't know this, we don't know this, we know this, and we're going there. And Japanese are much more pragmatic in that sense. We're going to engage Euroelectric next year, starting now, in a huge innovation action plan, which is a bit a train we are taking into an unknown destiny. We don't know yet what exactly is going to be the result of this. What exactly is the macro picture of the power sector, the business of the power sector in the future. Today is to say, it's to sell bulk shares of electricity to the customers. In the future, it's certainly about services, it's certainly about a completely different business model, transport, heating, cooling, all this is going to be completely changed in the future. And we need to anticipate this because there will be certainly losers and winners in the field. To sum it up, we need a European integrated market. There's the promise of 2014 from last year's European Council, let's have a European integrated energy market. But if you see the reality in Brussels today, it's more about governments and more about European institutions trying to avoid the next bash by the governments and not a lot of, say, courage in going there, than a truly European story. I very often find that Euroelectric is much more European than the European Commission, and not because the European Commission is not European, it's only because they are used to be bashed tomorrow. And if I was the European Commission, instead of working for the waste paper basket, I would certainly do the same, just do something which has a certain chance to be accepted by all these member states. Yeah? And therefore it's really needed public opinion about, and you, for the European integrated market. Europe is more cost efficient, Europe is also philosophy, and Europe will matter on all these fronts. The rest will not matter at all. And then the system approach, so it's not about generation, it's rest winning over coal, over gas, or whatever it is. Yeah. It's about the system approach, electricity system intelligent, which will, in the end of the day, also be able to manage the short-term challenges, which is especially the variable renewables. It's good to have renewables in the system, but indeed it has translated into more emissions in the short run. If you run baseload power plants in a flexibility mode, emissions increase tremendously. All this has to be taken into account for the future. We need a coherent and integrated EU energy policy. Again, policy has to innovate much more. What they are doing today is suboptimal. This kind of Soviet-style target approach is certainly the story of the past. Strengthen the ETS, and it is certainly something we are going to discuss now. And finally, innovation, anticipate the change, and make it happen on a European scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Well, we have a good chunk of time for some detailed and hopefully challenging Q&A. So I think what I'll do is take maybe a group of questions together, if that's all right, sort of try and cluster them, and then we can go from there. So can I see some hands on who would like to be brave and leap to the floor? When you are selected, can you please identify yourself, say who you are and where you're from, please.
Totally shocked.
You were so good. You answered everything.
My name is Adrian Hill. I'm a part-time researcher at TU Delft. A question is related to scale. Of course, this discussion has been focused at a macro scale where things are extremely complicated. It seems that at a micro scale, it's where things are actually happening and potentially not consistent with what would be the objectives at a macro scale. How to bring the two together? Because of course we have a lot of warriors at the micro scale that seem to be making the big difference. But how do you align that with what's happening at the macro scale?
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian. Others? Please, sir. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Layden. I'm a commentator on energy policy, having made my living on it for a number of years in the past, during the heroic days of Euroelectric's Europeanisation in the early 1990s. My questions are twofold. First of all, could you look at the nuclear issue and the choices on nuclear? We seem to have had over the last 10 years radical swings going back to nuclear. No, we're not going back to nuclear. And if not, that's one big gap to be filled. What's the judgment there? My second question is, I'm going to spend the next couple of days with regulatory lawyers from the States, and I'll have to explain our way of thinking about electricity in the future. Will they recognize this? And what's the analysis that they will be driven by? Have you looked at the Americans and how they're thinking in terms of a 30, 40 years time horizon? And are we on the same planet together? Thank you.
Are we on the same planet as the Americans? Okay.
I tried the Chinese as well.
Incredibly diplomatic. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take those two while we're mulling over. Arne, do you want to begin?
Yeah. If I start with the macro micro issue, I think that is really interesting and it's a real challenge, because I think also I said that what I'm trying to say with this triangle is that what will determine if it will happen is society, politics, and policy. And the problem is that I've been working for a power company for many years, so you really see the problem by the company I worked for. First they were forced to start investing in wind power by the government. After a time, some sort of enthusiasts started ruling the company. And then they found it was the person working, it was extremely hard to get the permits to establish the plants. So the problem is that society has several paces in a way, and it's not always very consistent. And you know, even if I think you have to realize that a system that is decarbonized, a power system that plays a bigger role, will be more visible. Whatever you do, it will not be a plant far away and then a line or a cable coming. It will be visible and a part of society in another way. And I think that can both lead to support but also to opposition. And the problem I think that we are facing right now is will it really be able to establish the power lines, the system? What will be the cost? What will be the delays? Will citizens support? How can ordinary people relate to this? Well, it won't happen. I said that it's some sort of slow development over time, but that also means that there really needs to be a public support for this sort of development. And I think it's still up to the enthusiasts to explain and make it visible to ordinary citizens, because I think it's very hard to relate to decarbonisation, for example, or to different power solutions if you're not an expert. But you need to get people engaged in building a more sustainable society, but that is the core of this, really. And couple the macro and micro level. And that is still a huge challenge, I would say. Then we had nuclear power. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I've been working for a company on nuclear power plants for 20 years in Sweden. And we have been doing, in principle, everything from enthusiasm to closing nuclear power plants. I would say that I think it's seen. If I take on my old hat from the power company, I would say that I would view nuclear power as extremely risky today as an investment. First of all, I think that Fukushima really scared the utilities off. You really see it killed one of the bigger utilities in the world. It collapsed more or less, and they couldn't handle the problems also. But the other part is that the investments are huge, and it's also very risky because you as an investor, you run easily into a situation where you have a plant that you can't use. Because in nuclear power, the cost is the same even if you don't produce anything. In principle, on the margin, there are some few percentage you can get rid of. But you have to run the plant, whatever, all the systems, you have to have the personnel there to keep up to the safety standard. And you are totally exposed to the regulator, the authority handling it. And as soon as they see a problem that will tell you to stop, you will have to stop the plant immediately until you prove that it's safe. So as an investment, it's quite risky. So I think the only way to expand or to keep nuclear power in the long run is it needs really to build on public support. That is accepted, otherwise you won't do the investment. And you also see that you to some extent will, I think that is the debate from what I understand in UK, that you have to de-risk the investment. But you never know, things goes up. but at least if I try to be realistic, I would say that the outlook is quite bleak right now. But it differs a lot between different countries. You have to be aware of that. I'm quite sure that I can say that we will never see European support for nuclear power. But you can see it in different countries, perhaps. And different countries can make different choices. And then the third question was the US. Are they on the same planet? I'm not sure. The US debate, first of all, the basic situation is completely different, since you have a shale gas boom, an extremely cheap gas. The gas price in US today is, I think, 1/5 or even less than what Japan pays for gas. And that has meant that they are going through a shift from coal to gas. There are two elements in this. First of all, it's about permits. What you have to do with the coal plants to keep them, you have to invest. But it's also so that it's cheaper, from what I understand, to use gas today. And that is fundamentally different from the situation in Europe. There is no support for the more sustainable society in general, from what I understand in politics in the US. In Europe, there is a real support, and then of course there is a lot of things that needs to be sorted out. But in general, I would say that European politicians, with some exception, in general, are quite supportive of building a more sustainable society. So if we're on at least we're on very different parts of the planet.
May I just ask a supplementary? The cheap gas is driving coal prices down.
In Europe.
Yeah.
Mm.
How is that going to affect your forecast so far?
Yeah, I think you have to make a difference between the long run trend and what it happened. There is a lot of variations. I guess that first of all I would say that the gas prices in the US are not sustainable on that low level. So the gas price will be up, but will not be up to the European or definitely not to the Japanese level. So a reasonable thing for US to do is to start exporting gas. And that is discussed, but of course it's a political problem. Of course, as an energy-intensive industry, it's been seen the same with power. I know when I worked in Sweden that the power industry in Sweden wanted to build connectors to Germany and Poland. our biggest hinder was the energy-intensive industry and the labor unions blocking it. And you see this in the US. I think that, you will not be able to hinder coal price-wise. If you just check the cost for coal, there is an abundant amount of coal globally. And it's, in principle, the cost is the cost for transportation. So as such, coal will always be cheaper than other alternatives. But then it's up to society how you price the externalities. I think that's a big issue, really.
Yeah, just Adrien, I'd like to ask you, what exactly do you answer the micro-scaling? Because there's various ways to respond to the question, but I don't get...
I suppose in terms of Europe, so perhaps the municipal, almost regional scale. The scale that actually relates directly with people, because I think both of your discussions have been focused on these larger scale policy ideas, but one of the issues that I'm seeing in my research is that society is going to be a massive barrier for a lot of change, simply because they're not prepared to accept the physical changes to the environment. And so it's this smaller scale, which is
NIMBY and this kind of stuff, or?
Yeah. And well,
I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. I think you're right in many senses, and certainly there's some fundamentalists on all kinds of sides. Yeah? I'm German myself, and I had the impression Germans are going for crusades against all kinds of things in a very black and white mode. But now it's really changing. It's quite interesting. Last year's German discussion after Fukushima, just to take this example, was very much Germany focused. We don't look at anyone, the impacts on loop flows and everything. Discussion, Europe, non-existent. And now it has changed, and I have the impression very often that the Germans have gone through something like a crash course in energy matters. Yeah? It's really crazy. You take them whatever kind of paper, and there's 10 pages on all kinds of technical stuff, AC, DC, I don't know what. Yeah? And I'm really impressed. Yeah? And it's absolutely not the case in other countries. Yeah? And you see also in Europe matters again. Yeah? Last year I had a fight with our member association in Germany, BDW, because on the nuclear stress test we clearly said this should be European. Yeah? And I checked the website of the BDW and I find only nuclear stress test. Yeah? And I said, where's Europe here? Our boss has decided Europe doesn't matter, we don't put it. Yeah? I said, what? The member of your lecture is not putting that down, how can you do that? Yeah? And this has really changed. You see, Europe resurfaces somewhat, and especially the region. Yeah? And I would be a little bit less skeptic. I think there's a lot of responsibility, especially in the power sector. I remember this kind of joke, kind of sayings, people complaining in Germany, for example, about the anti-nuclear people, saying that I don't take the nuclear power, I take the power from the plug. Yeah? The kind of things people shouldn't have said, maybe. Yeah? And I think there was a certain disconnect between those who have supplied bulk electricity to the people and the people themselves. And people at a certain stage said, now I'm fed up. I do it myself. Yeah? And they have also exaggerated this. I'll put everything on my house, I disconnect from the grid, and I just, yeah. I think this kind of move is a pendulum, very extreme. And it goes a little bit back again. Indeed, there are some people who find their religion in fighting electricity line or something. Yeah? Okay, forget about them. You don't need 100% of the people. 51 is enough. Yeah? But it's also true that NIMBY is maybe too simple to say also, yeah? Because there might be a reason not to build all these lines, like we have them in the NSOE grid development. There might be also non-transmission alternatives. Yeah? So I think there needs to be really a discussion with society to get the story right. Sometimes we might be too late in getting it right, but we lost a lot of time. So I would be less black and white maybe on that point. And indeed, it's always moving 2 steps forward, 1 step back, in the sense that you were talking about nuclear. This is already the next question. Yeah? People can say no to nuclear. If nuclear was without any alternatives, and there was the question electricity and nuclear or no electricity, I think this would be a different choice. But you can basically generate electricity with many, many possible means. The cost might be different, and the time scale might be an issue. Yeah? It might not be able to, if France, if there was anything like Fukushima in France, 79% of nuclear in the power mix would be a total disaster, complete disaster. You can't stop it from today to tomorrow, impossible. In Germany, it was 24%, doesn't really matter. In Europe, it's not 30%, it's also like 26% in the power mix. Okay, it can change it, it costs a lot of money, and that's again, people have to be aware of the costs, the cost side of their choices, and the question of Mr. Kevin, yeah? You're right, it's clear that the decarbonisation agenda, and nuclear is decarbonising. It is set back with getting out of nuclear. But if you take the full picture, decarbonisation is one part of the story. The final storage, the risk for the society. If you take Fukushima, I've seen very convinced nuclear people from our sector going to Fukushima, they come back shattered. Yeah? You see an area of 80 kilometers which can't be inhabited for the next decades to come. It's also unacceptable. I think it's something we need to get in on our mindset, and we need to accept that this transition is going to be really expensive.
Do we need something sudden like that to actually change the shift in people's minds to accept this?
I think we're on the right track in a way, because this has become a very prominent discussion. Your discussion today is even proof of that. I see energy discussions everywhere. I think 5 years before, energy was something limited to some experts and engineers.
Yeah, but I think that is, I think it's a very important issue you raise, because without, as I say, public support and engagement, it won't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is the problem, that many of those issues are so abstract. The other problem that I can see is that society's ability to choose direction is quite weak in a way. There is, I think that is something that will be given this sort of demand for. There is definitely a demand for a more sustainable future. That must be solved in some way, or at least handled in some way. That we cannot on one and say that we want this, on the other and say no to everything, and don't accept the cost. But the institutions in society, from what I can see, are not really able to handle that choice process. And the consequence of that is, of course, that you cannot choose direction in the long term.
Suzanne, did you have any other final points?
Yeah, just maybe the last one was this US, other planet stuff. Yeah. Wait and see. I think maybe too early to judge. I've been to 2 conferences this year in the US. One is the Sierra Oil and Gas stuff. Yeah, they've been shale gas, the future, fantastic and everything. Yeah, gas is cheap. Yeah, and then if you go to other conferences, Bloomberg, New Energy Finance, you see a different picture. Yeah, there's a lot of questioning also about shale gas and the future of shale gas and the environmental impact of shale gas and all this kind of stuff. So wait and see. The last word hasn't certainly been said on this in the US, and the cold stuff you've been saying, Arne, it's clear that the framework CO2 pricing, basically a CCS, etc., is needed to get that started.
More questions? One here.
Thank you. Hello? Okay, sorry. My name is Zella Mohamed. I'm a PhD candidate from Oslo, visiting the IES. My question is about gas. Both in the Commission and ECF 2050 roadmap, you mentioned that gas has to play a really important role in the coming years until 2030, more or less. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the role of gas. I mean, somehow I'm a little bit wondering whether it is really efficient to start building gas power plants and start developing that technology, knowing that, I mean, it's only in somehow a couple of years, and in the end it's not what we want to go for, and also what Euroelectric has to say about. I mean, are you also considering gas as a really important resource in the coming years?
Okay, thank you, Lena. Another one? 2 at the back here.
Hello, I'm Claudia from the IES. several questions, but I'll try not to be too greedy, so I'll just ask two right now, if that's okay. The first is about this discussion on investment that keeps coming up again and again through these presentations, and I hear this sort of chicken and egg story. Without the policy, we won't have investment. Without the investment, the policy can't be achieved. And then, Susanna, you had a very interesting point that, okay, the policy needs to be innovative. So, my question is really, what do you mean by innovative policy? You have concrete suggestions, and then, if we're not going to get this €1 trillion of investment by 2020, does this mean that we won't make it, or how are we going to make it? Or where will the money come from if it can't come from the private sector, if the investments aren't going into the right sort of infrastructure or other packages that are required to meet this, where is the investment going? So that's one on investments, a bit long. And the other question that I had was about the German transition, actually. And this idea that, okay, it's turned into a bit of a mess because it's very unpredictable, there are things going on. But is this not a lesson for the EU to say, okay, we decided to do this by ourselves, and we're realizing this is having effects, and other countries around us are affected by this? Is this not a kind of a wake-up call that, okay, as member states we need to talk more to each other on our energy decisions? Can it not be viewed in a positive light in that sense?
Hello, my name is Katja Wiedenkopf, University of Amsterdam, and also on yes. My question was very related to Claire, so I can be sure. I was wondering about this, the innovation. You know, we need innovation, but I was wondering, how do you decide in what area, you invest, in what area you try to foster more innovation? Because the whole carbon capture and storage story, for example, was pushed very much. There was a race between the US and Europe trying to get the technology first, but now the US kind of isn't very interested anymore because there's shale gas. So, but is that, you know, how do you decide what you invest your money in, and how can you predict, and how can you, I don't know, do this forecasting, and do you have any ideas on how the structure in the EU should be? So should there be, I don't know, the energy forecasting agency doing these things? Or, you know, do you have concrete suggestions on how to do that and how to, you know, catalyze the innovation in the right direction?
Thank you, Kat. I'll take maybe one more. Gentleman at the front here.
My name is Guus Keder from Inroads Scientific, we're a technology development company. I liked your, I like the Chinese triangle, the economy and the technology. And if you look at what's happened in the last couple of years, the Chinese have basically taken over the solar industry. The solar industry in Europe does not exist anymore. The Chinese are well on their way to capture the whole wind industry as well. And both solar and wind are very important elements in the decarbonisation of Europe. We are trying to become less dependent on the Middle East, on Russia for our resources. We're moving from OPEX to CAPEX, and the CAPEX will come from China. So to what extent are we going to be dependent on China for our whole decarbonisation effort? That's my first question. The second question is, Susanna has been talking about inconsistent regulation from Europe. It seems that now the RED is going to be changed, and that we can't use any more biomass that is competing with food. How is that whole picture going to affect our ability to actually decarbonize? And is this just a blimp in the whole regulation history or story, or is this an important element?
Okay, I think we've got a good lineup there. So from there on to Claire, and then Katja, and then who's... Do you want to start, Anna?
Yeah, I just have to try to remember gas was the first question. First of all, I think it's, in principle, if you are going to have backup capacity and have power available, you will need you will need some sort of way to store energy. You can either do that with storage technology directly, and also that will develop over time. In the short run, you will need to use thermal capacity. And that, there are a lot of, I won't go into the technical detail, but in principle you can say that you have a lot of gas capacity in Europe that is underutilized today. So I think even the gas industry published a study a couple of years ago saying that even just by switching from coal to gas, you could reduce the emissions enormously in Europe tomorrow, using the and partly I think that is true, but that is not what I'm really saying, that it's not about the future, it's about the backup or the flexible resource you need to support renewables when they are not there, so to say, to stabilize the system. And of course, there is a choice between building grids, storage, or backup capacity. Or the fourth choice is demand response. And you can combine them in different ways. And we have been building this on known costs. And then you see that it's very hard to expand storage today because there are no commercial activity alternatives. You can strengthen the connectors to Norway and the Nordic system, for example, will have an effect. You can add demand response, but that will take time. And then you will have to use existing resources. And gas is as such a more technically a more flexible. It's easier to go up and down, so to say, generation in gas. But of course you can use coal to some extent, and that is used from what I understand in Germany. It's even discussed to use nuclear in a more flexible way. It's not in no way ideal from a generational perspective, but it's as such possible. And of course, an alternative is to use biomass for producing or co-firing with coal, for example. But the important thing is to realize that you cannot say no to everything. It's definitely the problem with gas today is that you have a lot of extra capacity, so you don't have to expand the gas system or invest in green plants. The problem is the cost. The gas is quite expensive to come, and as I said before, the ETS system is not fully supporting that, to express it mildly. And then we had questions, or do you want to comment upon this?
The gas,
yeah.
We can do it also this way. Maybe just to complete the gas story, I wouldn't be as explicit as you have been on the gas, saying RES plus gas. It's clear gas has a lot of advantages. The flexibility, as you said already, is there, and it's better than coal or nuclear in flexibility, very clearly. Yeah? But it's clear that the capex is relatively low. The operation, the fuel costs are high, also due to the import and the uncertainty about the gas price and the oil indexation of gas continuing in continental Europe and things like that. But if you see today's picture in Europe, there was a lot of miscalculations. Yeah? The problem was that no one was expecting so much PV, wind or anything else to be built in the system. No one was expecting the recession to hit so strongly on the demand. And we have huge overcapacity on CCGTs, which are quite new in Spain with combined cycle, especially in Spain and in Germany. And last year we were kind of shocked by our Spanish members saying that the CCGTs have been running in Spain only 2,200 hours. Normally a power plant can run 7,000 hours in the baseload mode. Yeah? And in Germany, even this year, ENBW told us just one example, yeah? They have been running 0 hours, not at all. Coal has been outcompeting the gas completely. So everyone would be crazy to put any gas to the system today. Yeah? completely crazy. No one would do it. We know that one gas plant has been set up, it has been mothballed immediately the day after. Yeah? Forget it. Yeah? So it's more about how to save existing, even new gas plants. That's today the discussion. And the governments are quite aware there's a risk of the risk for what we call generation adequacy, especially there where we haven't sufficient interconnection capacity, southern Germany and stuff like that. And therefore they're discussing what they call strategic reserves. That would mean that you give some money to power plant operators to cover the running costs, the operating costs, in order to keep the plant somehow more or less alive in the system for next winter, for example, which is a certain risk. So I would say gas wait and see. The question is not to set up new gas capacity, at least depends on some places, but especially in Europe it's not the case. Especially it's more how to keep existing gas plants for the time being in the system. And indeed in the future there's some options for gas which is quite impressive, especially the power to gas could be one option. We have power which we disconnect, could be transformed into gas and could be stocked in the large infrastructure we are having in Europe, the gas infrastructure. But this again is too expensive today. That could be one.
Beyond
could be, yeah.
Should we move on to the investment questions?
Yes, Claire, you asked about the chicken and egg problem, and I think it's from what I can see is that the fundamental challenge is that we have something that will not be driven by the markets as such. There is you can say it's a market failure. We are trying to handle market failures. So to really believe, or at least it will take an enormously much longer time before a market as such will be able to build a more sustainable power system. So that means that there need to be incentives or ways in policy instruments. Can be a very different character and a very different quality. And if the problem is, today I would say that from an investor perspective there is reasons to doubt the seriousness of this development. You see that the investment where you have feed-in tariffs, that is a very clear-cut system, has an enormous effect. But it was a very interesting example last year that there was a conference, or perhaps even this year, that wanted to get investors into Greece. And they have a feed-in tariff for solar as well. Yeah. But the interesting thing is that no one trusts the Greece government. No one is. The support level was 100% higher than in Germany, but there are no investments. So that illustrates a little bit the problem you have as an investor. If you work with bigger investments, you are discussing the investment that you are going to make that will be up and running 10 to 15 years from now. So even more, because first of all you have to sort out what you want to do, and you have to do a lot of engineering work before you even can ask for a permit. And then you have a process that takes many years usually before you get the permit. You can start digging in the ground, and then it will perhaps at least take some 2, 3, 5, 7 years. So society must be able to build confidence in the policies that are going to have an impact on investments. And that is, I would say, far too weak today. Or otherwise you have to use instruments as the feed-in tariff, where you compensate or de-risk the investment totally. But that would be a very, very expensive solution if you are going to do it for the whole system. And then you had another question. I'll handle that. That was about Germany. You are the German expert.
You can handle the German.
Yeah.
I will comment. No, just kidding. No, you want me to? answer this question? Or? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the second question was about investments, innovative governance. What does it mean? Yeah? Just give you some examples. If you take today's European policies, you have DG climate, you have DG energy, and DG environment. And we see in the end of the day, there's a lot of conflicts between their policies. Take just the case of hydro plants. I believe that we know that hydro is extremely efficient, and PV, for example, after 10, 20 years, you have to completely renew it. Hydro, 80 years, so it's really a different story. But the Water Framework Directive and some excessive interpretation of these are offsetting investments in pump storage and all these kind of things. Yeah? And there's this kind of conflict in the end of the day, which needs to be settled. And the risk is, and there's a kind of thinking in the box in the archaic policy making from yesterday, which is we are fulfilling our targets, and I get a promotion, and I do the next target. Yeah? That's a bit the kind of way, and everyone, even students, are at risk to function this way. Yeah? Everyone should question even his own way of strategic approach. Yeah? But the policy makers is they have the responsibility to get the framework right for this complicated issue of long-term investment. They need to find something innovative to get these three: environment, climate, and the investments right. And this is clearly not the case today. That's the German transition. Yeah, wake up call. Well, I wouldn't be a mess. Indeed, the question is a little bit, how do you want to handle this kind of things? What should the Germans have been doing? Last year, should they have asked the French, what do you think if we phase out the nuclear? And then I think Sarkozy's response would have been quite clear, forget about it. Yeah? So this is certainly not the question. Even I know that our utilities have been complaining, and they are right, about getting kind of a letter from Berlin, tomorrow we're going to stop your nuclear power plants. So the question is not that the government can't do that. They can, why not? Can be re-elected or not after that, they can. They should have, and there I agree completely with you, they should have coordinated that choice a little bit more. They should have said to the German utilities and to the other stakeholders, a bit like the situation of the First World War, I don't know any parties anymore, I only know Germans in a way. Yeah? I say, okay, let's do that together. Let's find the best way to do it, the cheapest way to do it. The same goes for Europe completely. Germans are exporting problems via the interconnection, and the others have reacted with phase shifters and all these kind of things, which is extremely stupid. And there was another way to do it. But I wouldn't agree with you that the German model as such should give a wake-up call to all the others to say, okay, let's keep with the old system. The Germans are all crazy. I'm not convinced, considering the different models in Europe today, if the French are not more crazy than the Germans. If they go for 78% nuclear and there's one serious incident, I would say there's a serious risk. There needs to be some diversification. So I think we shouldn't judge the model, but I completely agree. There should be a clear and harsh judgment on the way how it was done. That was certainly not right.
Well, we had a question about the Chinese. We had two questions. At least I remember one.
There was one on innovation. And then on China.
Yeah, we have one on innovation.
Yeah. How to foster
Yeah, and that is hard. I would say to really foster innovation, I would say that if I look into the power sector today and compared to the situation in the end of the 80s when I started to work for a power company, you know, today you have, I think that the opening up of the sector, the opening up the grids, opening up the competition, creating real prices and so on, have made it much easier to also be innovative. During the old days, each geography was controlled by a utility. And if they didn't want to have the technology or anything, usually they didn't like real ideas. They said no. And no one was really able to establish something. That has changed completely. You would never have seen the sort of development you see in Germany, for example, in 20, 25 years ago, because it would have been blocked from the very beginning. So I would say that the sector is as such able to work with new technologies. On the other hand, I would say that the utilities as such are not as very innovative by nature. They are extremely conservative. But you can also see that it's fully possible. For example, the company I work for, when I started, they had one guy working with wind power. When I left, I had 500 persons. A whole business division working all over Europe with wind power. And so I think that the only way to work with innovation in reality is to work with developing it commercially. Well, that is the hard thing to do. Of course, you need to support that by having experts and develop knowledge and things like that. But just develop knowledge at universities or in research will not solve the problem. You also need to be able to commercialize the technologies. And to what extent support is needed, I don't know. I think the problem is a little bit that you need to see the possibility to expand something. You won't invest in anything if you don't think that there is a future for your product. And that is, I think, is a little bit, the sector is a little bit depressed today, I would say. That is at least my impression.
Yes, but okay, let's make just some comments on this innovation. You're saying conservative, true. I would just call it the power sector is a pragmatic conservatism sector in a way, and they always change non-lease and stuff like that. So that's maybe giving us some hope. Innovation. What needs to be done on a European level? It's not a question about having a clear agenda. What exactly is the picture looking like in 2050? That's difficult and impossible to do. No? But what is more important, there's a fantastic spread of new technologies already available today. EVs, electric vehicles, smart grids, all kinds of things. Yeah? Unfortunately, the framework is not there and the deployment is not there. CCS, for example, is extremely important. It might be some countries saying, I don't want CCS. Why not? Yeah? Some others might say, I do it. Yeah? But what is missing for CCS is deployment. And I'm quite happy in the Horizon 2020 proposal by the Commission, they, for the first time ever, have acknowledged the full innovation cycle. The innovation cycle starts with a good idea, it goes through the patent, and goes through early demonstration, and goes to market uptake now. And this needs to be supported, and it's clear that a depressed sector as the power sector is today, or in the economy today, as such in a way, there needs to be some risk sharing. And there needs to be also some risk sharing on spending money, because it's also about spending money. It might happen that CCS will be demonstrated, never happen at all. And that's how innovation, unfortunately, is going. So that's important. Yeah? So there needs to be the learning, what the so-called learning curves. Yeah? EVs are in the very beginning of learning curves. They cost a lot of money. There needs to be standardization. We've seen PV going down tremendously, photovoltaics. Yeah? Because the Germans and 3 countries have been paying the learning curve all alone. Doesn't make any sense to do it like this. Yeah? So you need to share the risk in a way for these technologies. There needs to be more focus. There's always this example taken the Airbus. Yeah? There were some 4 countries in the end of the day, Spain, UK and France and Germany going together and saying, okay, we want to do this, let's go into the aviation sector. And they have been setting up one of the 2 most important companies in the world. And this is a bit considered as a competitive advantage Europe policy. Can you compare electricity and power to aviation? Maybe not, but I think this gives us some idea where we should go. What should be the end of the day? It's not humanitarian job. It should be also about jobs and the competitive advantage of Europe. Indeed, it's not about a super centralized European innovation policy. The member states are doing a lot, but they're not coordinating enough. There should be a little bit of subsidiarity, regions going together in these kind of senses. So it's about going on the full investment cycle. It's about risk sharing, public-private. It's about coordinating more and having more focus in innovation. One question?
Yeah, that was about the role of China. Yeah, first of all, of course, China, whatever we do, play a very important role in the future. We already see that. I think the Chinese interests both power grid along in the long term, EDFs, They are investing in different things. But is that as such a bad idea? If you look at it from a regional perspective, I know up in the far north of Sweden, where there is a lot of hydro, I think they would be happy to get the Chinese to take over from the Swedish state, because they don't see the difference, really. And they have two different investors, they can always get something out of it. I think the fundamental problem couples to innovation, really, and how you commercialize new ideas. And the problem, I think, with the German solar industry is that the idea was to manufacture things. I think you can play, you can still commercialize things and build up activities, engineering, construction work, the knowledge. And that has been established in Germany. And some of the smaller companies that are specialized in it still prosper. But to think that you can compete in volume manufacturing with lower cost countries is quite unrealistic. And that you also think that you can stop that from happening is also unrealistic. The really interesting thing is that the manufacturing equipment they have in China comes from Germany, from what I understand, where they build the solar panels. They have imported the equipment and then created the volume, so to say. And in a way, I think it's a positive thing that we see that this sort of development also happens in China, if you look from a sustainability or the decarbonisation perspective. But what we do in Europe, in reality, will not make any difference in the long run. I think the emissions, Europe's part of the emissions is under 10% and going down. If you look into the long-term development, all the growth is in the developing economies in India and China. So the OECD countries are going down. So it needs to happen, but we have to relate to it in a realistic way. And I really don't see that. I think it has to do that with the ability to see where can we really establish activity, what sort of activities can you run in Germany? If you create a German market, what can you get out of it? If you think that you can build up a big manufacturing industry, employ a lot of people directly in the production part, you are quite unrealistic. And on the other hand, there is a whole industry handling installation and so on that has also been developed in Germany, and that will always happen in Germany. The interesting thing with if you look into power is that it will always be local, because you need the plants and the generation where the people live. So even if you have foreign investors, you will still have the plants left.
I might be foreign. Yeah, just to complete this, I really like your question, because I think that's one of the big questions we are having. And it's extremely difficult. You can have emotional answers. These bloody Chinese not in my backyard. That could be one emotional answer. And it is easy to have it, especially when it comes to infrastructure. The Portuguese power company EDP has been bought to a certain extent by Three Gorges, by the Chinese company, or the grid has been bought by the Chinese. I'm not sure I would like that too much. I would just really believe. And also the Spanish government has been approached by China, and they suggested them, we want to buy the Spanish gas and electricity grid. Is that something you would like? Emotionally, I don't think we would like that so much. The Gazprom or the gas guys from Russia, we don't like them. You might not like that. But when you go beyond emotions, first of all, on the solar discussion, if you follow Financial Times or whatever you follow, you see that in the last days there's a lot of negative information about Chinese solar industry. They are crashing as much as the German solar industry. They're really in a crash, because there was this 2004-2008 PV bust cycle, which has translated into huge overcapacities, and even in China, they are really in a horrible situation, even in China. What you can see in all the public available press today. And so the problem is not only in Germany, it is even in China today. And again, you can question this feed-in tariff system, which has led to this kind of things to happen. Yeah. If you listen to the IEA, Fatih Birol, for example, he's saying that the cheap clean technologies are going to come from China. The only chance to decarbonize the world is that. Must discuss that also. Might be. Yeah? I would say it is a bit like the discussion we always had with the Russians. Yeah? The question is, do they really follow the same rules of the game? Are they unbundled if they want to invest into our structure? And I think that's a bit the question. And there I would have indeed some doubts. If you see, for example, now the Chinese have changed their strategy, the government, because they back all these foreign investments. And the backing today is based on the following legislation, which says you have to invest into physical assets, and you don't need to make any profits, you should just not make any losses. Yeah? And indeed, that's a certain risk, because that's not at all the name of the game for any other investors. And I think there is some, at least a need for some monitoring. The craziest thing I have experienced myself 2 weeks ago, there was a visit from State Grid, which is one of the six biggest companies in the world today in China. And they came to see us in Euroelectric, and we're sitting there in Euroelectric focusing on EU 27, 2020, how do we meet it? As State Grid guys coming and saying, we have your solution, we're going to set up a 5,500 kilometer line, yeah? Ultra high voltage direct current line from China via Kazakhstan to Europe, and we are going to solve your security of supply problem. I go, what? And really, this is not true. They're crazy. I asked them, what's the price of this? Because in Europe, 1 kilometer line costs €1 million approximately. I said, how much does it cost in China? They calculate, also the same, 5.5 billion. Okay, what's the business case behind it? Then they also had one of the lines going through, they had 3 alternative projects, and they are serious about it. One goes via Russia to Berlin. I said, okay, Berlin is maybe not a high demand area, there's not much industry. Okay, where would you put it? Okay, let's put it to Hamburg or something. It's really strange, yeah. I think this kind of things needs to be clearly monitored. And we are a bit obsessed with the Russians in Europe. Each time there's Gazprom, there's a long history in Europe, and China is a bit far away. We need to also ask ourselves, what are we doing in China? Clear, right? Because we have also been investing everywhere there. What is exactly the name of the game there? And I think there's not enough discussion about it, and we need to kind of...
The Russians had exactly the same idea 20 years ago. They were going to build
power line instead of gas,
from Linz, or Linz was in Russia, to Paris, all over Germany. And also with the salmon, so we really looked into this and started a discussion about what is the rationale for doing this. And the only way was that, the only reason was that the gas prices were around 10 in Russia and Germany.
Yeah, they didn't want to sell gas.
Effectively they did, because they built the gas pipeline instead of the power.
Yeah.
That was there already in the 70s, no? But was set up already. But there was this very interesting study, EPS, UPS, UCT, done by Mr. Luther, maybe you know that, which was about interconnecting, because we have 2 different systems in East and West.
That was a follow-up to this,
and it has been stopped because no one really trusted these Russians. Let's keep it rather disconnected, and then we discuss 20 years again.
But on the other hand, I think you have to sort of, for as I said, I cannot see if Chinese interest invest in a regional or local distribution grid, for example, did it wrong. What is the risk?
They want to invest. We have a
but they can't remove it because it doesn't make sense. It's one of the few things that you cannot close down and go to China or wherever you want, because the investment is just meaningful in London. But of course, when you couple it on the high tension level, you have supply issues and so that will run into something. But it's something very different. But in reality, I think it's quite unrealistic to think that you should produce power in Russia and export it to Europe, because it doesn't make sense.
I
I knew that the discussion would pick up from the quiet beginnings, and we are in fact with only 4 minutes to wait. I think I would risk a lynch mob actually if I opened it again to further questions, but you can always ask afterwards. I'd like to plug the latest policy brief, if I may, coming out from the IES. This is by one of our researchers, Thomas Setish, entitled Energy Transition in Europe's Powerhouse, Alleingang, Avant-Garde or Blackout. And in fact, it connects very nicely with the idea of Germany's energy sector, the transition or not, and the idea that, of course, an economic approach needs to be examined with regards to fractures and overhaul of the internal electricity market. So I would encourage you to pick one up from behind, from outside the doors. And again, just a brief reminder that there's not a lecture next week, but there is on the 7th of November, Decarbonising Transport and Industry. So a great step forward as we move into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of decarbonisation. I very much enjoyed this evening. It was an extraordinary tour de force, I think, of an area that many of us, quite frankly, don't know enough about. It was much more geopolitical than I expected it to be, which is great, very, very, very tasty. And I think I'll invite you to thank them all again in the traditional way. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Anna. Thank you.